Today I will demonstrate how to use a coil to create a foot ring on a wheel thrown form. In addition to knowing how to trim a foot ring the traditional way, it's helpful to know how to create a foot ring using a clay coil. I have a leather hard piece here, and it's at the stage where normally I would trim it. I will place it on the wheel head, center it, and secure it with some clay. As the piece is slowly spinning on the wheel, I will place my finger at its side, adjust if needed until it is spinning evenly. I will then secure the piece to the wheel head with 3 pieces of clay. Rechecking the clay to make sure that it is still centered and hasn't shifted is recommended. I then take the clay coil that I have rolled and place it on top of the piece. I overlap the coil and adjust its size. I can use my needle tool to cut the coil. I will be cutting it at an angle, or I can use my metal rib. I will take the coil off of the piece to cut it to not disturb the piece itself. Using the metal rib, I cut into the coil at an angle. I return the coil to the piece. I want to make sure the coil is just outside of where the foot ring will actually be. So there is the transition where I will place the coil and attach it to the piece. To attach the coil, I will need a serrated rib, a brush, and joining slip made from the clay body and 50% water and 50% vinegar. Or I can just use vinegar and water. To avoid excess slurry, use the 50% water and vinegar combination. The coil will be joined together and then secured onto the bottom of the piece. While a needle tool could also be used, in this particular situation, a serrated rib is recommended. The 50-50 water-vinegar combination is brushed on both sides. Then both ends are attached to each other. Next, the bottom of the piece is scored with the serrated rib, just focusing on the area where the coil will be joined to the piece. Now the coil will be scored with the serrated rib. Vinegar water is brushed onto the bottom of the piece, and the coil is placed on top. I'll secure the coil to the piece. I'll then compress the inside of the coil to the bottom of the piece with my hands at the 3 o'clock position. The bottom of the foot ring is pinched and compressed. The inner part of the coil is secured to the bottom of the piece. Next, the outside of the coil is secured to the piece. Then the wall of the foot ring is compressed, and the wall rises the same way it would as when throwing a vessel. The wall is pulled several times until the desired height and thickness have been achieved. For this particular piece, instead of having the wall come straight up, it will be flared out just a bit. The bottom of the foot is pinched and compressed another time. And finally, as in when throwing forms, it will be finished with a chamois. You may decide to compress the side of the piece with a metal rib or soft rib, however it is not required. So usually a 1/4 inch depth for a foot ring is recommended. Using the coil will allow for a deeper foot ring on the bottom of this piece. I will use a needle tool to measure. Taking the needle tool to the transition point where the piece goes from horizontal to vertical, I'll make a little mark. So, tip of the finger at the bottom of the foot ring to the transition point, 1 inch. I will remove the piece from the wheel head. And take a look at the foot ring. The foot ring is even thickness with the form. It begins right at the transition point. Again, the transition point is where the piece goes from horizontal to vertical, and that's exactly where the foot begins. The foot ring is as I had envisioned it for this piece. So as with any type of attachment, I will cover this piece for 24 to 48 hours. I will also dry this piece upside down, and I have a whole video on why I do this. So for now, I will take the piece, place it on a wear board. I will wrap it in soft plastic, again for 24 to 48 hours, and then let it slowly dry. So once again, using a coil is just another way to form a foot ring without having to throw a piece with a thick bottom. There are actually a variety of instances where knowing how to form a foot ring using a coil can be very useful. So if you haven't yet tried forming a foot ring using a rolled coil, I hope this video and the information provided will inspire you to give it a try.